What if saving a life was a crime? In a galaxy divided by fear and silence, one man broke the law to do the right thing and paid the price with his freedom. But he wasn't forgotten. She was supposed to be royalty. She was supposed to be dead. Instead, she came back for him, not with thanks, but with fire. This isn't just a rescue. It's the spark that lit a rebellion, and it all started with one question. Why did he help her? If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move toward this wonderful story. The wind was sharp across the open plain, a dry and bitter wind that carried the scent of scorched earth and broken things. Smoke still rose from twisted metal and blackened stone, though the battle had ended days ago. No one came here anymore. The place had been marked as a red zone, a term that meant death in every language spoken across the stars. But Kalen walked where others wouldn't. His steps were slow and deliberate, boots crunching over glassy ash. He kept his head low, his mind quiet, listening. A soft pulse flickered in his hand, a signal, barely more than a whisper, picked up by the small receiver he carried in his satchel. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was nearly lost in the background static of 1,000 dead broadcasts. But it was there, a distress call. One no one had answered. One that had drawn him across star systems to this forgotten graveyard. Kalen wasn't a soldier anymore. He had turned in his uniform years ago after the last war broke something inside him he didn't know how to fix. Since then, he mapped stars, taught students, lived a quiet life. But this signal, this voice crying out from silence, had reached through the noise and stirred something he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was just the hope that someone somewhere still believed in helping. He found her in the ruins of an old Cerili scout ship, half buried under steel and dust. At first he thought she was a mirage, a trick of the heat waves rising off the wreckage. But then he saw her arm move, weak and trembling. Her skin was a pale shimmer of blue and silver, bruised and cut. Her body was pinned beneath a large slab of torn metal. Her white hair, tangled and streaked with blood, was spread out like frost over the black dirt. Kalen rushed to her side, crouching low. "Can you hear me?" he said gently. Her eyes opened slowly, bright violet, filled with pain and confusion. She tried to speak, but only a hoarse breath escaped. "Don't move," Kalen said. "I'll get you out." The metal pressing down on her was heavy, jagged, and wedged tight into the wreckage. Every instinct told Kalen to leave, to report the location and let authorities handle it. But he didn't move away. Instead, he planted his feet and pushed, muscles straining, pain shooting through his back. The metal groaned, then shifted. With one final grunt, he lifted it just enough to drag her clear. She gasped, coughing hard, each breath painful. Kalen reached into his bag and pulled out a small water capsule. She drank like someone who hadn't had a drop in days. Then she passed out. Kalen didn't know who she was, not yet, but her uniform, though torn, was marked with symbols of rank and noble lineage. She wasn't just another soldier. She was someone important, maybe even part of the ruling class. And he was human. That alone made his actions a crime. No law allowed him to be here, especially not to interfere with Cerili survivors. And touching someone of noble blood, that was worse. That was treason. But laws felt far away out here. And in that moment, none of it mattered. He wrapped her wounds, lifted her onto his back, and began the long walk out of the dead zone. The journey was slow. He had to avoid drones, patrols, even wild scavengers. The girl, still unconscious, stirred now and then, whispering in her native tongue. He didn't understand the words, but they sounded like someone dreaming of a home they feared they'd never see again. After hours of climbing over scorched hills and slipping through shadowed valleys, Kalen reached a small cave he had used before. Hidden by rock and shielded from scans, it was the only safe place for miles. Inside, he laid her down gently on a cot made from spare blankets. He checked her wounds again, cleaned the worst of them, and started a small heater to keep the air warm. When she opened her eyes again, it was well past midnight. She stared at him, confused. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kaylin sat across from her, tired but calm. "Because you needed help," he said. She didn't respond right. Away. Her eyes studied him as if searching for something, fear, trickery, weakness. Instead, she saw only truth. The flicker of something else passed through her expression. Not trust, not yet. But maybe the start of it. Kaylin didn't ask her name. He didn't care about her status or her species. He had seen too much war to believe in sides anymore. He believed in people. And right now, she was a person who needed saving. But safety was short-lived. As the sun began to rise the next day, the sky turned orange with the pulse of incoming ships. Kaylin had tried to block outgoing signals from the crash site, but clearly, someone had picked up the trace. A squad of Cerili enforcers landed just beyond the ridge. Within moments, the cave was surrounded. Kaylin stepped outside with his hands raised. "I'm the one you're looking for," he said. They didn't hesitate. The guards tackled him, beat him, chained his hands behind his back. He didn't fight back. He didn't even speak. Behind him, the girl screamed something in Cerili, her voice wild with desperation. But no one listened. Kaylin's last glimpse before they placed a black bag over his head was her face, bruised and glowing faintly in the morning light, her eyes wide with horror, then darkness and silence. Kaylin didn't know how long he was unconscious. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on a cold floor, the sharp chill biting into his skin. His wrists were raw from the metal cuffs that had dug in too tight, and his mouth was dry as sand. The room was dark. No windows, no light, just a steady hum of machines behind the walls. Somewhere above him, water dripped slowly. He tried to sit up, but his body ached from the beating. His head throbbed. He blinked into the shadows, trying to remember where he was. The last thing he recalled was the sound of her voice. Sci-Fi, the girl with silver blue skin and violet eyes. She had screamed for them to stop, had told them he saved her, but they hadn't listened. The guards had pulled him away, kicked him to the ground, and tied his hands like he was nothing more than a thief. He had done nothing wrong. And yet here he was, a prisoner in a place that smelled of mold and silence. The door opened with a hiss. 2 guards stepped in, tall and harsh in their dark armor. One of them barked, "On your feet." Kaylin obeyed slowly. His muscles screamed, but he didn't give them the satisfaction of showing pain. They marched him through a narrow hallway filled with smoke and metal. Lights flickered weakly above their heads. The air smelled of old oil and broken dreams. As they passed by rows of cells, Kaylin saw faces, mostly human. Some looked away, too far gone to notice another soul. Others glared at him with hollow eyes full of pain and questions. No one spoke. They had learned silence was safer. The guards pushed Kaylin into a larger room. Bright lights buzzed overhead. At the far end stood a Cerili officer, taller than the rest, his armor polished and his voice cold. "State your name." "Kaylin," he answered, his voice dry. "You crossed into forbidden territory," the officer said, reading from a datapad. "You interfered with a noble class survivor. You transported her. You touched her." "I saved her life," Kaylin said quietly. The officer didn't care. Without warning, he struck Kaylin across the face. A silver ring on his hand opened a cut along Kaylin's cheek. Blood dripped down to the floor. "You will speak only when asked," the officer said sharply. Kaylin stayed silent after that. They asked more questions, but he didn't answer. Not out of defiance, but because he knew it wouldn't matter. They had already made up their minds. They labeled him a violator, a risk, an example. He was thrown into a smaller cell this time. No lights, no bed, just cold stone and the stink of rot. Food came once a day, gray blocks of something tasteless. Water was a drip from a pipe in the wall. Days passed, or maybe weeks. There was no way to tell. Time didn't matter anymore. Kaylin stopped counting. He still thought of her. Sci-Fi. He didn't know if she had lived. He didn't even know her real name. But he remembered her face, the way she had looked at him, first with fear, then with something close to wonder. She had asked him why he helped, and he hadn't given her a grand answer. He had only said the truth, because she needed help in that dark cell. Those words stayed with him. Then one day something shifted. Far above the prison in the towering palace of the Cyrili High Court, whispers began to move like wind. Quiet rumors. A royal daughter had been found alive. Someone had saved her. A human. The queen's youngest daughter, long thought dead, had not perished on the battlefield, and she hadn't been rescued by her own people. The queen did not speak of it. She issued no statement. But in secret rooms, her advisors argued. What would happen if the story got out? What would happen if people learned that a human had shown mercy when the Cyrili had shown none? Far from the palace, Sci-Fi was alive. She had taken a new name, hidden her face beneath a hood, and disappeared from the cities of glass. She carried the truth like a stone in her chest. Heavy, painful, and impossible to forget. The man who saved her was in a cell somewhere, left to rot because he did what no one else dared, and no one seemed to care. But she cared. Sci-Fi found herself among strangers now, rebels, smugglers, outcasts, people who had no place in the golden halls of her people. She listened. She watched. She learned. And most of all, she remembered. The prison Kalen was held in wasn't just any prison. It was known as Hollow Deep, a place buried beneath an icy moon, the kind of place they used when they didn't want you to ever be found. When she heard the name, something inside her cracked open. That night, in a tiny cargo bay lit by a single lamp, Sci-Fi stood in front of a group of mercenaries. They didn't trust her. Why would they? But she told them what Kalen had done. She told them how he had lifted the metal off her chest, how he had walked for hours carrying her, how he never once asked for anything, how he just helped. A man named Corvin, rough and weathered from 100 battles, looked at her and said, "And what do you want us to do about it?" Sci-Fi looked him in the eye. "I want to break him out." A long silence followed. Then a woman with metal implants along her cheekbones said, "That's suicide." "Maybe," Sci-Fi said. "But so is letting good people vanish." And so, something began to stir. Not just in that room, but across the stars. A whisper turned into a wind. A forgotten man's kindness had lit a fire. And somewhere, deep in the dark, Kalen sat with his head against the wall, eyes closed, still waiting, still hoping, not knowing that help was coming. The frost-covered moon of Kelthar drifted silently in the cold space beyond the known colonies. Beneath its icy surface, hidden from any curious eyes, was Hollow Deep Prison. Most people didn't know it existed. Fewer knew anyone who had ever come back from it. And yet, through shadowed channels and hushed conversations, a plan was taking shape to break someone out. Not a warrior, not a spy, just a man who made the mistake of being kind. Sci-Fi stood at the edge of a broken control deck inside a stolen transport ship. The ship, barely holding together with patched metal and salvaged wires, hung in orbit above Kelthar. Around her, a crew of strangers prepared quietly for something nearly impossible. These were not trained soldiers or elite agents. They were runaways, exiles, and ghosts, people with scars both on their skin and in their hearts, and they were all here because of one story. A man who saved an enemy without asking anything in return. There was Rin, a blind Cyrili tech expert who had once built security systems for the royal family before they discarded him for speaking out. Now, his pale eyes stared at the screens through a neural link, fingers flying over the controls like he was born for it. Jessa, the youngest among them, checked her flight path again and again, heart pounding like a drum. She had no formal training, only a love for flying and a hatred for the empire that had burned her home. Then there was Corvin, the gruff ex-mercenary who had said no to the mission twice before agreeing with a shrug and a whispered, "Why not die for something that matters?" Sci-Fi paced, her long coat dragging behind her. She had changed since the day Kalen had carried her out of that burning wreck. The bruises were gone. Her silver blue skin had healed, but the fire inside her had only grown. She had never planned to become a rebel. She had never imagined standing on the edge of treason. But Kalen had shown her something stronger than fear. Compassion. And now, she would not leave him to be forgotten. Inside Hollow Deep, Kalen sat against the wall of his cell, thinner than before, weaker, but still breathing. He dreamed often. Sometimes of stars, sometimes of voices that once called his name. But mostly, he dreamed of Sci-Fi. He didn't know if she had lived. He didn't know if she even remembered him. But he held on to that tiny thread of hope, because hope was the only thing they hadn't stripped from him. The rescue plan was risky. No one had broken into Hollow Deep in over 40 years. Most didn't try. The facility was buried under miles of ice with only one guarded entrance, a cargo dock for food and prisoner transfers. Sci-Fi's crew would pose as a supply team, carrying forged clearance codes Rin had crafted from old palace data. Once inside, they would split. Sci-Fi and Corvin would find Kalen, while Jessa and Rin handled the power grid and communication. Blackout. They had a 5-minute window before the system rechecked all codes and shut them down for good. The mission began in silence. The crew docked without alarms. The guards at the hangar, dressed in heavy armor and bored expressions, scanned their ship lazily. Sci-Fi wore a medic's uniform. Her hair was hidden under a hood. She kept her head down, her voice low, playing the part of someone too tired to cause trouble. Corvin pushed a floating cargo crate, hiding weapons inside. They were waved through, without much care. Once past the main doors, things moved quickly. Rin tapped into the system and dimmed the hallway lights just enough to make the cameras blur. Jessa shut down outbound signals with a virus crafted from stolen trade code. Sci-Fi and Corvin navigated the twisting halls, memorized from old maps and whispered stories from past prisoners. They didn't speak, just moved, fast, quiet, focused. They found Kalen in a lower cell block. His cell was marked 32B. When Sci-Fi saw him, her breath caught in her chest. He was sitting on the floor, head lowered, arms resting on his knees. He looked older somehow, worn down. But the moment their eyes met, something passed between them. Recognition, relief, a silent thank you that didn't need words. "Kalen," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "We're getting you out." He blinked slowly as if unsure whether she was real. Then with a rasp in his voice, he asked, "You came?" "I said I would," she answered. Corvin worked quickly on the lock while Sci-Fi helped Kalen to his feet. He could barely stand, but he leaned on her and they moved. The alarms hadn't gone off yet. They still had time. But time is never generous during miracles. Just as they reached the main shaft, the system rebooted. Lights turned red. Sirens screamed. The hallway trembled with movement, guards rushing in. Jessa shouted through the comms, "They know, you've got 3 minutes, get to the bay." Sci-Fi and Corvin moved fast, supporting Kalen as they dodged fire and smoke. Rin triggered false alarms to mislead the guards. Jessa fired the engines as soon as she saw them break through the blast door, the trio half running, half falling, onto the ship. As they lifted off, gunfire followed them. Ice cracked beneath the ship's thrusters, but they didn't look back. Inside the ship, Kalen sat silently, still processing what had happened. Sci-Fi sat beside him, not saying anything, either. There were no grand speeches, no smiles, just breath, just being alive. And far above, as the ship slipped into the cold stretch of stars, the news began to spread. A human had been rescued from Hollow Deep by a Cirili. And not just any Cirili, a royal-born girl who had vanished long ago. Whispers became wind, and the fire beneath the frost began to burn. The sky over the colony world of Vereen 4 burned like an angry sunset, red and gold streaks clashing as warships hovered above the cities. The people below, both human and Cirili, watched in silence, unsure whether the day would end in peace or fire. For years they'd lived side by side, tense, quiet, but mostly in harmony. Now that fragile balance stood on the edge of collapse. And at the center of it all was a single act of kindness that had refused to be buried. Kalen stood at the edge of a balcony in a safe house nestled inside a mountain ridge. From here he could see the colony's scattered lights below, and further out, the dark outlines of the Cirili fleet. His body still ached from Hollow Deep. He hadn't fully recovered. He doubted he ever would. But it wasn't his wounds that kept him awake. It was the sound of people saying his name like it meant something more than just a man who did the right thing. He had never wanted to be a symbol. Cirai joined him, quiet as always. She didn't need to say much these days. He knew she carried the same weight he did, the consequences of defiance. Her face had become the face of a movement. Across the stars, people whispered about her. Some called her a traitor, others a savior. But to Kalen, she was simply the girl who hadn't forgotten. Together, they had become the spark that lit something much bigger than either of them expected. It started with whispers in forgotten ports, then protests in neutral colonies. Then came the ships, cargo freighters, old mining rigs, retired, patrol vessels, crewed by those who had nothing left to lose. They called themselves the Free Chorus. They didn't want war. They wanted their voices to be heard. That day, they sent a signal. A broadcast across all channels, bouncing between satellites and abandoned space stations, finally reaching the Queen's court. It was a simple message. A voice. Cirai's voice. My name is Cirai, daughter of Counselor Tellen. I was left for dead by my own people. I was saved by someone we were taught to fear. Not because he had to, because he chose to. Billions heard it. Kalen watched the aftermath with quiet disbelief. The Cirili Empire had ignored it at first, hoping silence would smother the movement. But it didn't. Support grew faster than they could control. When they finally responded, it wasn't with words. It was with destroyers. 3 of them arrived in the Kari system, where Free Chorus had made its base. Their message was clear: surrender or be wiped away. But the rebels didn't surrender, and they weren't alone. Civilian ships joined them, hundreds of them, forming a protective net around the colonies. Pilots, engineers, farmers, teachers, they all flew together not to attack but to shield. Kalen had never seen anything like it. Inside the command room, tension hung like fog. Cirai stood at the center, her hands on the table, surrounded by her crew. Corvin leaned against the wall, silent but ready. Jessa tapped her foot nervously, watching the blinking red markers on the map. Rin sat with a wire looped into his neural port, reading every signal in and out. Kalen didn't give orders. He had no rank. But when the communication system went down, he stepped forward without hesitation. He picked up the backup microphone, looked at the flickering screen showing all the ships listening in, and spoke from the heart. We didn't come here to fight. We came here because kindness was punished, because silence was forced. If they fear compassion, then let them fear us. If they call us traitors for protecting each other, then we wear that name proudly. We are not enemies. We are voices, and today they will hear us. The signal was picked up by every ship in orbit. Then came the battle. The Empire's destroyers moved fast, their weapons precise. The first shot tore through a civilian freighter. Panic followed, but the Free Chorus held. They didn't scatter. They moved as one, weaving through the fire, jamming signals, creating confusion. Cirai led from the front in her repurposed scout ship, her voice guiding others through the chaos. Kalen remained at her side, helping where he could, patching comms, giving calm words over the radio. He didn't hold a weapon, but his presence grounded the others. Just knowing he was there reminded them why they were fighting. The battle lasted hours. When it ended, 2 destroyers were gone. The 3rd was damaged and fled. Dozens of rebel ships had fallen, but they had held the line. And more importantly, they had shown the galaxy what unity looked like. In the days that followed, the queen finally spoke. Not in pride, but in something closer to shame. She withdrew her fleets. She pardoned Kaelin. She lifted the bounty on Sci-Fi. And for the first time in memory, she opened talks with human leaders, not to control, but to listen. Sci-Fi and Kaelin didn't attend the first meeting. Instead, they stood again on a quiet balcony watching the stars. "Do you think it'll last?" Kaelin asked. Sci-Fi didn't answer right away. "No," she said, "but it'll grow." They both knew peace didn't arrive all at once. It came, in slow waves, one voice at a time, one act of mercy, one choice to stand when it was easier to kneel. And somewhere, in the space between fire and silence, the galaxy had finally heard them.